Hello and welcome everybody to the Great Agri-Food Debate 2023, where students of food and agriculture from third level colleges across Ireland and the UK are gathering virtually for our 8th Annual Great Food Debate. This is a joint initiative between Dawn Meats and McDonald's, who are proud to be supporting the next generation of business leaders. The topic this morning for our debate is EU climate ambitions will endanger human health. And we have two teams this morning to debate this. They are from University College Dublin, better known as UCD, and Progressive Young Farmers, who are regularly referred to, of course, as PYF. Proposing the motion are the team from UCD, and opposing the motion are, of course, PYF. It should be noted that the stance taken by the teams are the positions they have assigned by random draw and do not necessarily reflect their point of view. The Twitter handle, and we'd love you to get involved in this, the Twitter handle today is #GreatAgriFoodDebate. Of course, we cannot have a competition without judges, and we're very grateful to have five great representatives from the industry to help us with our endeavours. And it is my pleasure now to introduce them, and perhaps they might just say a couple of words themselves. So, as they say, in no particular order, first up is Dan McSweeney, Chairman, Board BIA. Good morning, Dan.
Morning, Paul, and good morning, everybody. As Paul said, my name is Dan McSweeney. I'm the Chairman of Board BIA. I've been involved in these debates before. They're generally very enjoyable occasions, and my only advice really to the teams and the speakers is to really enjoy the interaction and enjoy the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And next we'll go to Cathal O'Connor, Business Unit Head with AIB. Good morning, Cathal.
Good morning, Paul, and thanks very much. Joining you here from AIB Corporate Banking, where I cover agriculture, food manufacturing, amongst a few other sectors, and also sustainability. So keen interest in some of the topics coming up for debate this year. It's great to be back for the 2023 Great Agri-Food Debate, and I just want to wish all the teams, all the competing teams, the very best of luck, and looking forward to hearing the debates as they unfold. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you indeed for that, Cathal. Thank you. And next we have Harriet Wilson. Harriet is Agriculture Manager for McDonald's UK and Ireland. Good morning and welcome, Harriet.
Good morning, everyone. Harriet Wilson from McDonald's UK and Ireland. So I'm responsible for agriculture and anything to do with how we source the food for our restaurants more sustainably. Really looking forward to the debate today. And as we start to experience the effects of climate change in our food supply chains, climate ambitions are now more important than ever. So really looking forward to this one.
Thank you indeed, Harriet. And next we go to Tim Rycroft, excuse me, CEO of AHDB.
Good morning, Paul, and good morning, everybody from sunny Warwickshire in the UK. I am indeed Tim Rycroft, Chief Executive of the UK Agricultural Levy Body, AHDB. I've been doing that for nearly 2 years. And in that time, I've learned a great deal about agriculture, and I'm looking forward to learning more this morning. It's my second opportunity to judge this competition, and I enthusiastically said yes when I was invited back, because I think it's just a fantastic opportunity to hear the best minds attached to some of the most interesting questions in our world.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Tim. And last but not least, Isla Roebuck, who's Business Public Relations Director with Dunbia.
Good morning, Paul. Good morning, everybody. I look forward to a very interesting debate over the next few sessions, and I wish you all the best. We look forward to seeing or hearing some good ideas that we can maybe introduce into our businesses, as in Dawn Meats and McDonald's. And best of luck, everybody. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Isla. And again, thank you to all you judges who give so generously of your time for this endeavour. And it's my pleasure to welcome our participants this morning from UCD and PYF. And I say to both teams, you're very, very welcome. I know you've put in the hard work and you're probably quite on edge now to get going. But can I just say to you to try and combine that edginess with an enjoyment in this competition, and we'd like to wish each and every one of you all the very best. To make a competition, we have to have rules, of course, and you've been given, I understand, details of those earlier. But just at this point, I'd like to, if you like, highlight the main ones for you again. So the team captains will open and close the debate and introduce their teammates. Each student's speech will be a maximum of 5 minutes, and my colleague Beth Ann is on the screen there. Beth Ann is kindly doing the timekeeping for us, and so she's going to tell you time 4 minutes to give you an idea that there's a minute left, and then at the end of 5 minutes she will say time up. So it's time 4 minutes, and then a minute later time up. Time will be monitored by Beth Ann right the way through, and her decision is final. Interrupting a student while they're speaking is not allowed. However, after each speaker, 1 point of information may be offered by the competing team. Points of information are not allowed following the captain's closing arguments. And so we are ready at long last to get 2023 underway. And it's my pleasure now to introduce and ask UCD Captain Ciara Fox, who is proposing the motion, EU climate ambitions will endanger human health, to start.
Thank you, Paul. Chairperson, judges, members of the opposition, ladies and gentlemen, I would firstly like to welcome you to this online Great Agri-Food Debate. My name is Ciara Fox, and I'm the proud captain of the UCD team here today, where we profoundly propose the motion that EU climate ambitions will endanger human health. Let me start by defining the motion. The EU is a collective group of 27 European countries who work closely together and act as a powerful trade bloc on the global stage. Ambitions refer to a strong desire to achieve something, and in this case, it's the EU's desire to meet climate targets, their main one being to reach a climate-neutral economy by 2050. The Oxford Dictionary states health to be the condition of a person's body or mind. However, health is also a state that allows the individual to adequately cope with all demands of daily life. To endanger our human health is to put people's bodies or minds at risk. The desire to achieve these targets is what concerns my team. The desire to meet targets on paper is so strong that the means of getting there and the consequences of these have been given what seems to be very little thought. The opposition may claim that all policies and law-binding agreements are highly thought through and the repercussions are very much so considered. But let me cast your mind back to the starting years of CAP. Farmers were encouraged to rip up hedgerows and to drain wetlands. That's quite the difference to what they're being told today. We are now re-wetting what we drained 20 years ago, and we are now planting twice the length of hedgerow if we dare remove any. The EU have done a U-turn on their policies, which is why we must proceed these climate ambitions with caution. Because what if it's too late to do a U-turn? What detrimental effects could the EU cause on human health before we admit that our policies were dangerous? We have our Irish agricultural industry exporting 90% of their produce, yet accounting for 100% of the greenhouse gas emissions. Should we be the country to carry that footprint when we aren't the ones consuming it? Carbon footprints of Irish dairy farms average 1.1 kgs of carbon dioxide per kg of fat and protein corrected milk. This ranks Ireland as one of the most efficient producers of milk in the world. So should Ireland be required to reduce their numbers of cattle simply to reach targets on paper, especially if we produce it more environmentally friendly than most other countries? These are the considerations that need to be taken into account before even daring to think about legally binding targets. Again, we must question the thought process of these ambitions. Were they quickly decided due to major public outrages? Have they thought about the impact of these to human health? Well, my team have, and they will show you the detriment this will have on human health. So without further ado, let me introduce you to all my fellow teammates here today. Zach will start us off by discussing the ramifications of the legislation drafted by the European Union and why it is not fit for purpose. Cliona will talk to us about the impacts these ambitions can have on farmers' mental health. She will emphasise how health is more than just your body and the food you eat, but the importance of having a healthy mind. She'll emphasise the necessity of stability in terms of job security and for future generations to come. Our fourth speaker, Rachel, will talk us through the EU's plans to reduce the consumption of red meat. She will explain how plant-based alternatives aren't just simply swapped with meat in the diet, as there are several consequences to human health of consuming this food. But to sum it all up, these ambitions are a bit too big with too small of a timescale. Don't get me wrong, the end goal is wonderful. The thought process is nothing but of good nature. But we can't ignore the consequences of aiming too high when we don't have the means to achieve it. It will only result in downfalls here, there, and everywhere, with human health falling apart in the middle of it all. Think about it as baking a cake. If you take the cake out too early, it falls flat, and there's nothing you can do to raise it. The damage has already been done. The difference is you can bake cakes until you get it right. You can't go back in time and change policy when humans' health has already been harmed. The ambitions behind these plans are far too great to not endanger human health. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ciara, and well done, and thank you for getting our first debate off to a great start. And so we're delighted now to welcome the Progressive Young Farmers Captain, Lorenza Carvalho, to speak in opposition of the motion.
Thank you very much, Paul. Good morning, judges, members of the opposition, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lorenzo Carvalho, and I proudly stand before you as the captain of the McDonald's Progressive Young Farmers team, firmly opposing the motion we are discussing today, EU climate ambitions will endanger human health. The Cambridge Dictionary defines health as the condition of the body and the degree to which it's free from illness or the state of being well, but we believe mental health plays a big role in being healthy too. According to the World Health Organization, climate change is impacting human health and endangers several of the essential elements of good health, such as clean air, safe drinking water, and nutritious food supply. Moreover, according to the same organization, 24% of all estimated global deaths are linked to the environment, making it the top cause of death in the world. So, what can be done to change this scary course of nature? The EU has decided to act and tackle the environmental problems we are facing right now by creating a climate pact, aligned with the climate objectives proposed in the Paris Agreement by the UN. The Green Deal will allow people, communities, and organizations to come together and fight this common problem. To accomplish these objectives, there need to be changes in all the different sectors of society. To make these changes in agriculture, the supply chain, and the consumption of food products, the EU created a strategy to modernize these sectors into a fairer, healthier, and environmentally friendlier food system, the Farm to Fork strategy. To explain how the Green Deal, especially the Farm to Fork strategy, is going to positively influence the environment, my team will shed light on some of the policies and measures already taken or planned by the EU to move towards a sustainable environment. May Smith will guide us through how the EU is planning on tackling the rising temperatures, an issue causing heat stress on not only crops and livestock, but also humans, while also trying to alleviate the drought effects on the food systems. Jack Thomas will explain to us how the EU is going to decrease the greenhouse gas emissions, causing a substantial improvement in air quality and, consequently, in human health. Chris Hinch will clarify what is being done to improve the quality of the soils, which will positively influence the quality of the air, the food produced in the EU, and the water streams surrounding farms. Despite all the initiatives from the European Union to fight climate change, the impact of COVID-19 was tremendous, negatively impacting some of the environment elements and disturbing the EU's climate ambitions. But the EU didn't give up, and in 2021 created a plan to tackle pollution in the air, water, and soils of Europe. And this plan was not just made by some politicians sitting around the desk with no idea of the real world Europe or the world's facing. No. This plan considered the voice of the European people, as the EU had launched a forum where everyone could post their opinions on what the priorities should be, which was then summarized and included in this zero pollution ambition. By 2030, the EU plans to achieve a 55% reduction in the mortality caused by air pollution, a 50% reduction in the plastic waste on the seas, a 50% reduction in the food waste throughout the supply chain and households, a reduction in nutrient losses and chemical usages on soils, and, among others, an increase in the percentage of clean water streams. To make all these measures financially viable or even rewarding for the farmers, the EU is formulating new policies for CAP, the Common Agriculture Policies, assuring fairer funding to the farmers while improving their positions within the supply chain, making sustainable and environmentally friendlier practices more financially worth to implement. Moreover, the budget assigned from the EU to the CAP, corresponding to 31% of the total EU budget in 2021, showing how serious the EU is on the issue. The EU climate ambitions will unquestionably have a positive effect on the air, water, and soil quality while reducing food waste, making its production healthier and more environmentally sustainable. Therefore, if the EU is aiming to improve the elements the World Health Organization considers essential for good health, I cannot wait for the opposition to show me how that endangers human health. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for that, Lorenzo. We now have a point of information from UCD, and Sarah would like to make that point. Over to you, Sarah.
The EU's climate action farm to fork strategy seeks to reduce pesticide use by 50% and fertilizer use by 20%. A reduction in pesticides and fertilizers will cause greater crop losses, greater prevalence of human vector-borne diseases, and a lower shelf life of agricultural commodities. This will also reduce crop livestock yields.
Great point, Sarah, but I think the farm to fork strategy is being applied with other measures at the same time. So new crop varieties which are more disease resistant, and other ways of farming which won't really imply lower food production, as Chris will mention later on, and Jack will also mention later on their arguments. So yeah.
Thank you, Lorenzo. So to continue with the opposing view to the motion, EU climate ambitions will endanger human health, I'm delighted to welcome May Smith from PYF.
Good morning, Chairperson, Adjudicator, members of the opposition. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is May Smith and I'm here today to oppose the notion that EU climate ambitions will endanger human health. What future do you see for your friends and family? What future do you see for the next generations? What future do you see without EU climate ambitions? If we continue without drastic change, think of a world with even greater wildfires spreading further than we've ever seen before, drought suffocating our landscapes, and starvation with lack of availability for essential balanced nutrition. EU climate ambitions are in the best interest of global health, with the target to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 55% in the next 7 years. This is a forecast working towards limiting the rise of global temperature to 1.5 degrees centigrade. If we don't limit this rising temperature, we are likely to experience further increase in wildfires, drought, extreme temperature fluctuation, storms, and flooding. I now want you to focus on the global tragedy we have already experienced just in this last decade alone. How can you justify that any targets to try to reduce the likelihood of these events continuing will endanger human health? Wildfires. Australia is a country experiencing an increasing number of these, most recently wiping out over 18 million hectares of land that destroyed hectares of biodiversity, valuable crops, and killed livestock. Wildfires also have further impact because they decrease vegetation, therefore degrading the soil structure. When this is reduced, it makes the land more susceptible to flooding and further soil erosion, therefore reducing long-term production. Alternatively, we could follow EU ambitions, and together we could use better farming practices, such as more efficient nitrogen fertiliser use, to reduce pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. Or droughts. South Africa and Botswana are part of the 40% of global population suffering a lack of access to clean and safe drinking water. Climate scientists have found that Botswanan agricultural practices will most likely be unviable if temperatures increase by just 1.5 degrees C, due to the lack of rain and increased evapotranspiration. Without agriculture, there will be both water and food poverty, forcing people to migrate elsewhere. Or we could work with the EU ambitions, aiding greenhouse gas reduction through agricultural waste management, such as installation of more efficient irrigation systems for direct, resourceful use of water, helping to reduce global climate impacts. Or how about storms and flooding? The UN Sustainable Development Nature Report has highlighted a 300% increase in food crop production since 1970. Despite this increase, approximately 11% of the world's population are still undernourished. Without EU climate ambitions, storms are predicted to increase in frequency and severity, causing flooding, crop loss, infrastructure and soil damage. What does this mean for the future of food security if there are already 880 million people without adequate nutrition? Or you could actively minimise this risk by encouraging more sustainable farming practices, such as ensuring livestock aren't negatively impacting soil structure, where possible, reducing poaching of the land and encouraging soil carbon storage. Do you still think that ignoring climate targets is going to endanger our health? I ask you because the European Commission clearly state that rising global temperatures with extreme fluctuations, like those that we are increasingly experiencing, will significantly disrupt farming cycles. The Common Agricultural Policy has 10 key objectives, some of which highlight the importance of a fair income, food and health value alongside climate action.
Time.
Is it possible to produce enough food for a profit whilst reducing emissions? These new targets have been put in place to aim to increase the resilience in agriculture against climate change, directly benefiting human health. Increasing resilience from extreme weather events such as heat waves, droughts, storms, and floods, trying to minimise challenge and risks to an already volatile farming system. In the words of Winston Churchill, to improve is to change, and to be perfect is to change often. Now, I'm not telling you that EU ambitions will solve all global crises, but we must welcome change and move forward, embracing new methods for a bright future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, May, for your contribution. Do we have any points of information from UCD?
May, just at the start of your speech, you mentioned how you told us to imagine a world without EU ambitions, and we're not arguing that EU ambitions shouldn't be put in place. We just believe that more thought needs to be put into their effect on human health. For example, you mentioned food shortages. Glyphosates are one of the most widely used herbicide, and the EU is planning on banning them. In fact, they already have, but they don't know the effects, so they continue to extend their approval. And banning it puts an insane amount of further stress on stressed farmers, and not to mention already existing food shortages. So I'm just wondering how you explain that. Thank you.
So, firstly, glyphosates have already been proven to damage human health, if in watercourses. So I think that the EU are trying to reduce further damage by this. I'd also like to say that new food practices are being done in parallel with reducing food waste, such as using the farm to fork, trying to encourage local produce, and also things like vertical farming with the grow up, which I think Chris talks about a bit further on, where they're successfully not using chemicals. And yeah.
So thank you very much, May. I would now like to introduce from UCD, proposing the topic EU climate ambitions will endanger human health, Zach McCarthy. Over to you, Zach.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm proposing today's motion, is EU climate ambitions will endanger human health. In my opening argument, I will discuss the ramifications of the legislation drafted by the European Union and why it is not fit for purpose. Before I get into it, however, I would just like to thank Maeve for quoting that insightful Winston Churchill statement, the man responsible for the Bengal famine, one of the biggest food crises until now. I'd also like to give reference to Lorenzo, who talked about reducing emissions. But, however, the EU justifies burning wood by planting more trees. Burning forests generate more carbon emissions than coal per kilowatt. Yet climate policies classify wood burning as renewable and carbon neutral. How is it in the EU's ambitions to increase air pollution yet claim burning wood is a viable climate change mitigation solution? Because of loopholes in climate policies, countries burning wood can claim emissions reductions required by law, but these reductions merely exist on paper. To get back to my own speech, EU climate ambitions fail to address the gravity and proximity of the consequences of climate change. Thus far, the EU failed to impose adequate remedies to prepare communities being faced with the prospect of adverse weather incidents. I will then go on to give reference to outdated laws imposed by the EU that fail to address the dangers our European citizens face. I will outline why this legislation should be reformed to make way for a more suitable approach to the little, if not no, provisions made out to address risk reduction projects to deal with adverse weather incidents caused by our climate crisis. My first example of how EU climate ambitions have fallen subpar to the expectations we must have for our union is in South Moravia, the Czech Republic. In late June 2021, the largest tornado ever recorded in the Czech Republic occurred, with over 1,600 homes left uninhabitable. Climate ambitions failed in implementing adequate risk reduction projects within the region. When the Director of People in Need, a local non-for-profit charity, addressed the tornado, he stated, "Nobody expected a tornado in the Czech Republic. No one was prepared for it, and no one had any experience of how to act in the event of such a disaster." I ask all that are listening today, of all climate risk reduction projects implemented and funded within the European Union, is this in any way, sufficient preparation for a country known to have 5 to 8 tornadoes per year? Risk reduction in major weather events starts with awareness and drills to reduce fatalities. The climate crisis began, and we have already lost citizens to this challenge. This oversight occurred only 3 months after the European Union's adaptation strategy plan had been unveiled to address the unavoidable impact of climate change. The little lack of urgency to unveil the strategy in this case is one deadly blunder. I will continue on to my next point of complete mismanagement of basic risk reduction projects carried out by the European Union. I will mention their lack of governance related to water systems within the Union. A complete disregard to their importance has become evident. Thus, they have been deprived, unfit to deal with rising water levels and incoming extreme floods. In particular, the EU Floods Directive was implemented to establish a framework for the assessment and management of flood risks to reduce the negative consequences of flooding on human health, economic activities, the environment, and cultural heritage in the European Union, which at this stage has become insufficient and practically unenforced. The directive requires member states to develop flood risk management plans and take measures to prevent or reduce flood risks, a very important law that has failed to be implemented by some member states a whole 9 years on from implementation, of which Spain entirely failed to implement flood risk laws.
So thank you very much for that, Zach. I'm just wondering, do we have any points of information from PYF?
The EU has announced a reform on the Common Agriculture Policies for 2023, the CAP 23-27, where they would do a revision every year on all the measures and if the goals are being accomplished for all the different countries. And in 2021, there was a new Green Deal made by the European Union to face these new issues that Zach talked about. So wouldn't you agree that the European Union is doing what they can as an organization with no power to change the laws in sovereign countries, just proposing goals with which all of the countries need to agree? Wouldn't you agree they're doing their bit and they're pushing changes? And you can see the changes right now, seeing you have statistics proving that, for example, the greenhouse gas emissions are decreasing since 2019 before COVID, or the water streams have been 40% cleaned so far. So my question is, do you think the EU is doing enough, or what would you do differently than what the EU is doing?
Well, you mentioned there that the EU doesn't have the power to change national law. That's not true. That's entirely false. EU directives have precedence over national law. It's a common standpoint of the European Union.
Thank you very much, Zach. We now move on to the opposition of the motion. EU climate ambitions will endanger human health, and I'm delighted to welcome Jack Thomas from PYF. Jack, over to you.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jack Thomas, member of the McDonald's PYF team. Today I will be opposing the motion forwarded, EU climate ambitions will endanger human health. The EU is planning to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030 and become a climate neutral continent by 2050. CO2 emissions from the energy sector, which is largely the burning of fossil fuels, is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the EU, responsible for just over 75% of the EU's greenhouse gas emissions. This underlines the energy system's central role in the transition to a climate neutral economy. To meet these emissions reduction targets, the EU plans to increase the amount of renewable energy. The Renewable Energy Directive is a legally binding target set, stating that by 2030, at least 32% of energy produced must come from renewable sources. So how is the burning of fossil fuels endangering to human health? Life expectancy of people living near fossil fuel power stations is reduced by over a year. In 2018, 8.7 million people died as a result of fossil fuel pollution, as shown in research conducted by leading universities. 16.8% of deaths in Europe in 2018 were a result of fine particle matter exposure generated from fossil fuel combustion. Without fossil fuel emissions, global economic and health costs would fall by $2.9 trillion. Therefore, the EU climate ambitions to increase renewable energy will not endanger human health, but will in fact benefit it due to less exposure to fine particles that lead to respiratory diseases and other health issues. Another way the EU is trying to meet its 2030 target is reducing emissions from the transport sector. Currently, transport accounts for about a quarter of EU greenhouse gas emissions. To achieve climate neutrality by 2050, the EU needs to reduce transport emissions by 90%. They plan to provide users with affordable and accessible alternatives to their current transport habits, which are healthier and cleaner to achieve sustainability. Air pollution from transport is significant, particularly in cities. The main pollutants are particle matter and nitrogen dioxide, which harm both the environment and human health. Another issue with fossil fuel transport currently used is noise pollution. Over 100 million people are affected by harmful levels of noise pollution in the EU, which can lead to a wide range of health issues. So with the EU announcing their climate ambitions to reduce transport emissions and make transport greener, how can this possibly endanger human health? Less harmful gases and less noise pollution will in fact have the opposite effect of endangering human health. These new climate ambitions will benefit human health. Another large emitter of greenhouse gases in the EU is soil. When soil is disturbed and cultivated, carbon dioxide that has been sequestered by previous crops is released into the atmosphere. Therefore, the EU has introduced the Common Agricultural Policy, also known as CAP, as part of its new Green Deal to allow the transition towards a sustainable food system. The CAP promotes sustainable agricultural systems in the EU, enabling farmers to provide safe, healthy, and sustainably produced food and protect natural resources. Under cross-compliance rules, EU farmers have their payments linked to a set of statutory management requirements. These cross-compliance rules safeguard natural resources with specific rules to protect soil. For example, having requirements for minimum soil cover by living species, which contributes to carbon storage in the soil. This is achieved in various ways, one of which could be planting cover crops to ensure that no bare soil is left over winter. McDonald's have introduced grants to their potato growers to plant cover crops before their potato crops to improve green cover and increase soil organic matter. The Sustainable Fund invested £25 million into UK potato growers to invest in sustainable potato growing, including planter loosening tines and effective and efficient irrigation infrastructure. The introduction of CAP means that food in the EU can continue to be produced sustainably in the future, which has a positive impact on human health as the food production system will have longevity for future generations. So I leave you with this. How can having a sustainable source of safe and healthy food for years to come possibly endanger human health? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jack. And again, I'll throw it open to UCD. Have we any points of information to make?
Yeah, Sarah has a point of information.
You mentioned reducing emissions from the transport sector, and one of these is electric cars. Electric cars may reduce emissions, but it seems to go unnoticed that 60% of cobalt used in the batteries of these cars comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where children as young as 7 are miners for this element. How does this improve human health?
Well, the reducing the impact of electric cars in the EU and other member countries, reducing emissions, like I said, 8.7 million people died in the EU in 2018. This is a result of fossil fuel emissions from fossil fuel powered cars, as well as noise pollution. As I previously mentioned, 100 million people are affected. So if you get rid of all fossil fuel powered transport, then those 100 million people won't be affected, and those 8.7 million people won't die.
Thank you very much, Jack. And so I'd now like to welcome Cleona Byrne from UCD, proposing the motion, EU climate ambitions will endanger human health. Over to you, Cleona.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Cleona Byrne, and today I'm here to convince you, through honest truths and scientific facts, that the EU climate ambitions will endanger human health. While Lorenzo has spoken in great detail about the mental health benefits of the current climate action, he has failed to acknowledge the multitude of colossal negative effects the EU's climate ambitions will have on farmers' mental health. Nitrates derogations have forced dairy farmers in Ireland to buy more land in order to dilute their stocking rate. This has resulted in a rat race between tillage and dairy farmers to buy land. Tillage farmers are often outbid by dairy farmers as they have a steadier income and large capital available. May, you mentioned that 11% of the world is undernourished, but I ask, how do you expect tillage farmers to tackle this issue if tillage farmers can't buy land to grow produce because the EU's climate ambitions have forced them out? Great irony in all of this is one of the EU climate ambitions is to increase tillage area by 50,000 hectares by 2030, yet they can't compete for land purchases. Issues surrounding derogations aren't even unique to Ireland either, as derogations are set to be granted to Dutch farmers until December 2025, on condition that maximum organic nitrogen permitted will be stepped down. Additionally, farmers have been forced to buy new machinery such as dribble bars and incorporate new practices like introducing solar panels in order to meet climate regulations. This is a lot. Imagine having all of this on your shoulders. The cost of reinventing infrastructure in order to become a more carbon neutral continent by 2050 is going to strain a farmer's mental capacity and cause monetary stress. As the daughter of a part-time suckler farmer, I am left wondering what good a 7% annual reduction in greenhouse emissions, or as both May and Jack said, a 55% reduction by 2050 is if my dad can't pay the mortgage repayment or has to contemplate calling the vet out for a C-section because he isn't sure if he can afford it. It's unquestionable that such stress can adversely affect human health. It can leave you feeling angry or fearful, it can fuel tension, and increase the risk of depression and anxiety. 1 in every 4 farmers have contemplated suicide. Just think about this statistic for a moment. Studies show that in Ireland, more farmers die by suicide than any other type of farm fatality. This is a startling figure when you consider that agriculture is responsible for the greatest number of work-related fatalities of any economic sector between the years of 2011 and 2020. The passion and the grow has been taken out of farming, as EU climate ambitions have made farming into nothing more than an unrelenting box-ticking exercise, requiring farmers to constantly battle to meet targets and obey regulations in order to meet its impractical and, quite frankly, overly ambitious targets. I wonder, and in fact I want to ask the opposition, how can you claim that this does not hurt someone's health? It's impossible to ignore the biggest con that the EU's climate action plan will have on humans and their health, and yet the opposition have managed to hide from it. I'm talking, of course, about job losses. A report from KPMG on the impact of Ireland's carbon emissions targets predicted that 56,400 agricultural jobs would be lost. And it's not just Irish people or even farmers who are going to be collateral damage of climate ambitions. The loss of jobs worldwide in the coal and mining industry are staggering. It's estimated that 78 million workers' jobs will be eliminated in the shift to a green economy. And for every direct job lost in a power plant or in mining, the community loses 4 indirect jobs. The EU climate plan is a source of great irony yet again, as one of its aims is to create jobs, and yet it has completely wiped out the livelihoods such as turf producers and will continue to destroy livelihoods, all in the pursuit of a certain percent. As my captain defined earlier, health is the state that allows individuals to adequately cope with all demands of life. But this just isn't possible as the EU is hell-bent on delivering overly ambitious climate actions that have carved a path of destruction through job losses. Finally, human health is as vital a source as food and water. At what point will the EU concede that its climate action plan is endangering every fabric of human health?
Time.
How much are they willing to lose in order to reach a single target or certain percent? And why is it that mental health seems to have taken second place to all of this? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cliona. And I wonder if we have any points of information from...
I have a POI.
Yes, sir.
So with the EU climate ambitions, without the EU climate ambitions, we will have to farm in extreme weather conditions, as we saw this summer with the lack of grass for dairy and beef farmers. Having all these pressures on farmers, this will increase stress. So so with these EU climate ambitions, trying to improve this, reduce temperature increases, how can this be negative for mental health? This will improve mental health, as it will provide sustainability for farmers in the future and allow them to farm in less extreme weather conditions.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jack. There are lots of pressures on farmers and all, especially with the climate, and irrigation has caused a loss of land, and that's put monetary stress on farmers. I'm not claiming there isn't stress on farmers, it's just that there doesn't seem to be any monetary or any money support for farmers in the EU. And if you look globally, there definitely isn't any for places in South Africa and America. So there definitely are pressures, but the argument is that the money stress is the huge issue, and that's what causes most of the mental stress on farmers.
Thank you very much for that, Cliona. So I'd now like to invite PYF's last team member, Christopher Hinch, to oppose the motion, EU climate ambitions will endanger human health. Over to you, Christopher.
Thank you. A hearty good morning to you all, judges, moderators, and of course, my fellow opposition. I'm Christopher Hinch, and today I'd like to oppose the motion that EU climate ambitions will endanger human health. I'm lucky enough to have a family farm at home, a farm that is currently 50 miles away from the nearest coastline. With the EU predicting sea levels could rise 80 centimetres by 2100, my farm would then be just 15 miles from the coast. You'll hear the opposition express dismay at other methods used to tackle climate change, possibly using up undoubtedly valuable farmland. I ask the opposition, would you rather have land used to prevent this climate crisis while maintaining space to grow food? Or would you prefer 217,000 hectares of prime arable land and 130,000 households to be submerged within the Lincolnshire Fens alone? While on the topic of water, I was very fortunate to attend the Oxford Farming Conference this year, where Sir Tim Smith concluded his speech by alerting the crowd to the alarming rate that male fertility had declined. This can be traced back to chemical ingress in water, which is largely addressed in EU climate laws. By 2030, the EU has set a goal that fertiliser usage will be reduced 20%, condensing nutrients loss through leaching into waterways by 50%. Now I can almost hear the opposition screaming at me. How are we going to feed a growing population if we are reducing chemical inputs? Well, my honourable disputant, companies such as Grub have been working since 2013 to produce food in a new, more environmentally friendly manner, with no pesticide usage and absolutely zero risk of nutrients leaching through vertical farming practices. Just last year alone, InFarm managed to produce a wheat crop that yielded 117 tonnes a hectare. To clarify, that's 26 times that of the conventional farming average. Not to say soil is becoming invaluable, however. After talking with Leaf at Harper Adams, I was made aware that over a hectare, increasing soil organic matter by 0.1% sequesters more carbon than planting broadleaf trees over the same area. The idea land can be used to grow food or reduce climatic pressure is becoming outdated. Farmers adopting agrivoltaics are seeing a range of benefits from growing crops under solar panels. The extra shade is helping to maintain soil moisture, increasing yield, while the secondary income from producing renewable energy is providing incentive to invest and implement the technology. But human health doesn't just come down to food and energy. Nearly 50,000 people committed suicide in Europe during 2016. Dr. Hilbich, who works with the EU Commission, has identified how proximity and access to nature reduces antidepressant usage and therefore risk of suicide. The implementation of green spaces within towns and cities features heavily within the Green Deal. Not only will they improve mental health within built-up areas, but can also be used to supplement food production. As I alluded to earlier, water could be our nemesis in the future. Houses and land could be flooded. But we must not forget water may also be our greatest weakness. Europe covers over 4 million square miles, and it's safe to assume there'll be some variance across it when it comes to the effects of climate change. Low groundwater levels during 2019 caused severe water shortages in Central Europe, affecting 29% of the EU territory. Worst of all, they've not returned to previous levels. This provides a large issue for farmers using irrigation. By 2030, if temperatures increase as expected, irrigated crop yields could reduce by 20%. But the actual effect could be much worse if there was irrigation ban, causing crops to perish, as seen in recent years.
Time.
I will leave you with this question. How can improving soil, air, and water endanger human health? Thank you.
So thank you very much for that, Christopher. And do we have a POI from UCD, please?
Yes, yeah, I have a POI. You spoke fondly of vertical farming, but it has high running costs and high power consumption. A large part of our energy is still generated from coal. So how sustainable is vertical farming? And are you suggesting we wait until we aren't using coal as an energy source?
Thank you very much for the question. So vertical farming uses 90% less water than conventional farming methods and produces considerably higher yields. So with the lack of ground source water, which we've identified in Central Europe, farming as conventionally used may not be possible. And the buildings which vertical farming can be made in can have solar panels on the roof and wind turbines around and various methods of renewable energy to power this enterprise.
Thank you for that. So I would now like to introduce UCD's final team member, Rachel Maguire, proposing the motion, EU climate ambitions will endanger human health. Rachel.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rachel, and I'm here today to highlight to you all the negative impacts a reduced consumption of red meat will have on the health of European citizens and how this domino effect could all be sparked from the European Union's climate ambitions. Firstly, I would like to go back on something that Christopher said in his speech about improving water quality. But one of the ambitions of the European Union is to plant more trees, leading to nitrate leaching from forests. So which one is it? Clean air or clean water? Also, May talked about adequate nutrition in her speech, yet the European Union expect a reduction in consumption of red meat by 2030. It is difficult to come to terms with the truth when it seems that there are new studies each week telling you right from wrong, like the ambitions made on whether red meat is harmful to human health or not. Attention is being diverted from red meat in favour of plant-based alternatives, as many believe that this is the only way climate targets will be achieved. The importance of the beef sector is seen throughout the majority of European countries, and around 1.5 kg of meat each week is consumed by the average citizen, twice the global average. But before we think about reducing it, we should be redistributing it. Beef is the third most widely consumed meat in the world, making it all the more reason that the industry must be maintained and not destroyed. Now, as we all know, the European Union is a major producer of beef, with a total herd amounting of around 78 million cattle. They are also known to support their farmers through direct payments, and this assists farmers in producing safe, healthy, and affordable produce. Profitability is not the number one aspect when farmers are concerned with. The health of their animals trumps this. As part of their ambitions on combating climate change, the European Union has set aside €170 million to promote a healthier and more sustainable food system. However, the European Union expects that the meat per capita consumption will drop from a 69.8 kg figure recorded in 2018 to 67 kg by 2031. Along with Europe's ageing population, portion sizes will be considered smaller, leaving people with the prospect of eating 460 grams of meat per week, the quantity equivalent to around 2 good-sized beef burgers. Whoever thought that we'd have to go to war over our dinner choices? Now, the food industry is determined to sell us the idea that vegan food is healthy, natural, and wholesome, when in reality, some plant-based products are ultra-processed, unhealthy, and potentially addictive to one's health. A quote from the Telegraph stated that many ultra-processed foods don't just trick our palates, they confuse our bodies too, triggering hormones which encourage us to overeat. Do you think that this is a healthy opposition? A survey carried out across Europe recorded that just over 40% of the consumers that took part have either stopped eating red meat or have cut down. However, the other 60% don't have the stomach to try insects and plant or lab-grown meat as alternative protein sources. It is scientifically proven that some of the key nutrients essential for healthy brain functionality are found predominantly or exclusively in plant-derived products. Most abundantly found is choline, found in beef and used to produce neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, playing key roles in learning, memory, and motivation. Plants contain significantly lower levels of choline, leading to a plant-based diet insufficient. According to a multitude of studies, whether it may be vegan, vegetarian, or pescatarian, without meat, people's diets will be lacking nutritionally. To conclude, the climate ambition to reduce red meat is not well thought through. It is important to note that the quality of red meat holds here in Ireland, where Board BIA standards are extremely high, different to the standards placed in countries like Brazil, where hormones are pumped into the meat produced. Do you trust that meat? I certainly don't. Thank you.
Over to you, May. You have a point of information. Go ahead.
So the Western countries have been over-consuming protein from the requirements for years. And the point is that we're trying to eat a more balanced diet, eating what we're required in our bodies rather than other. And the EU ambitions don't suggest getting rid of beef production, but using more sustainable methods of farming, such as regenerative agriculture or improved genetics with the work of Genus and Brongai Farms. Reducing the food miles from farm to fork, so promoting more local produce. Would you not welcome better farming practices to more efficiently produce beef with lower inputs on your farms?
First of all, a lot of our production needs to go to Africa and Asia rather than countries in Europe. Also, May, you talked about the protein content of certain foods. Protein is not the most important nutrient when it comes to certain foods, and diets such as vegetarian, vegan diets can be deficient in nutrients such as vitamin B12, which can leave profound marks on the brain and visible in brain scans. And also, around 86% of vegetarians are vitamin B deficient.
So thank you very much for that, Rachel. And so we're now about to hear the closing remarks from both team captains. May I remind you that in this instance, there is no room for points of information. And so at this stage, it is my pleasure to hand over for the final argument opposing the motion, EU climate ambitions will endanger human health, Lorenzo Carvalho.
Thank you, Paul. Judges, members of the opposition, ladies and gentlemen, despite the very good discussion we are having today about this motion, we believe we should also consider facts and statistics to get to a conclusion. In 2019, before COVID-19, the EU had reduced its greenhouse gas emissions by 22% compared with the 1990 levels, while in 2020, due to all the lockdowns, the greenhouse gas emissions were below the 1990 levels. Despite the EU's ambition of decreasing by 55% on their greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, the EU countries think the measures will not be enough to reach this value, believing that the reduction will be 41%. As we heard from Jack today, the consequences of greenhouse gas emissions are devastating for human health, and therefore, even though the EU might not reach their ambition of 55%, the reduction that is going to happen, driven by the EU climate ambitions, will substantially improve human health. According to the European Environmental Agency, from 2005 to 2020, there was a 45% reduction in premature deaths related to air pollution, proving factually the positive effects of the measures in this area on human health. We also heard today the EU is planning on making the transport sector greening, with goals like car makers achieving a 100% cut on CO2 emissions by 2035, forbidding the sale of new fossil fuel cars by that year, or, according to the Euronews, major European cities like Paris, Barcelona, Rotterdam, or Milan strongly supporting a change on buses used in Europe, making them carbon-free by 2027. These and several more measures will have a direct positive impact on controlling the rising temperatures, as the greenhouse gas emissions, according to the World Health Organization, are one of the biggest contributors to this temperature issue, and controlling it will help prevent all the natural disasters May has mentioned before, and all the destruction that comes with them for human health, especially the mental health, as we heard today a lot. Let's now look into the food production sector. With the revision of the legislation around the usage of best before and use-by dates on food products that will happen, according to the EU Parliament, by 2030, the re-education of people about the choice of products when going to the supermarket, and the creation of platforms like Good to Go, selling directly to the consumer products from restaurants and coffee shops that would go to waste but are still in impeccable condition for human consumption at a discount price, it is possible to have a reduction on the food waste, increasing the food availability. With the living crisis we are facing at the moment, an increase in food availability is something very positive on its own, but it can also lead to a reduction in the price of food products, allowing the consumer to consider other elements of the product when they buy, apart from the price, leading them to be more open to opt for healthier, even environmentally friendlier food products. Studies indicate that, before the living crisis we are facing right now, people were shifting their eating habits and also their purchase habits, opting to eat healthier, more environmentally sustainable food, choosing products produced more sustainably, being the non-usage of chemicals one of the highest influencing factors. Moreover, as we heard from Chris today, it is possible to feed an increasing population with the land we have by adopting new practices like vertical farming, for example, new ideas like farming under solar panels, or making green spaces in cities, making the most use out of the land, using fewer chemicals, and improving soil's health, food nutrition value, and human health, all in harmony with a new way of looking into our soul and the use we give to it. After looking into all these facts, my team and I strongly believe that the EU climate ambitions are pushing all the EU countries to move towards a more sustainable and environmentally friendlier practices in all sectors of society, leading to the EU having higher air, water, and soil quality, higher food availability, and healthier food products, meaning that whether they achieve their climate ambitions or not, which is not the motion being discussed today, the human health, especially the mental health, will always be improved and never be endangered. Thank you very much for listening to us.
And so we've heard the final statements from the progressive young farmers opposing the motion. So it's with pleasure now we introduce our final speaker, and for the second time, UCD captain proposing the motion, EU climate ambitions will endanger human health. Over to you, Ciara.
Thanks, Paul. Hello, everyone, once again. Firstly, I would like to thank the opposition for their debates today. I can confidently say there were strong arguments on both sides, but I hope to fully convince you all by the end of my speech that EU climate ambitions will endanger human health. May asked us the question, what future do you see without EU climate ambitions? Well, my team and I would say not a very good one. These ambitions affect people globally. For example, the livelihoods of people in other countries when the carbon border tax is applied to their produce. The opposition have focused on the good things these ambitions will bring to the table for EU citizens. What about the people in the US, or in Brazil, or China, or New Zealand, or anywhere else outside of the EU? The opposition has forgotten that this motion is not confined to EU human health. In fairness, Jack didn't seem to have an issue with children being minors to create cobalt for cars, as long as noise pollution was solved in the EU. May discussed of reducing livestock as they damage soil structure. The alternative is to feed the population through tillage. Yet tillage disrupts soil structure, accelerating surface runoff and soil erosion. The solution isn't as simple as swapping a few cows for heavyweight machines. In fact, your own team member Jack discussed the disadvantages of disturbing soil like tillage would. The opposition also forgot that climate change is a global thing. It is not confined to one area. In 2050, the EU doesn't rejoice and say they've minimised climate change. They are only 8% of the world. If other major countries are still increasing their carbon footprint, then climate change is still as prevalent then as it is now. What the opposition have forgotten about the topic at hand is that my team aren't claiming that these climate ambitions are bad for climate change or the environment. What my team and I are saying is that these ambitions put the health of our humans at risk. Whether that is worth saving the environment for or not is a completely different debate altogether. However, to refresh your memory on my teammates' points, Zach talked about how countries' plans to prevent damage from climate-induced disasters have been falling short as these happen more and more frequently. Cleona told us about the impact that these climate ambitions have on farmers' mental health. She emphasised how 1 in every 4 farmers contemplate suicide. And this shows how we need to protect our farmers in this ever-changing world, and that putting more pressure on them with little support is not the answer. Cleona also told us of the job losses from these ambitions. According to the EU's own impact assessment, 100,000 jobs can be created, but nearly 500,000 could be lost. Not to mention the 614,000 workers in Germany who will no longer be needed due to the ban on the sale of internal engines by 2035. Finally, Rachel informed us of the importance of our beef sector. Our farmers receive direct payments, which allows for our farmers to focus on sustainable and healthy production, unlike other countries which have to focus on profit per kg of beef and can't afford to be sustainable. Rachel told us of the disadvantages of replacing red meat with plant-based alternatives, and how a large majority of these foods have a long list of ingredients and that aren't that beneficial to our health. But to summarise, what we are saying here today is that the way the EU are going about achieving and maintaining these climate ambitions is what is going to endanger human health. From mental health to indirect countries, from mental health to indirect countries benefiting from our cap on production, there are problems left, right, and centre. My final question is, does the title as being the first climate neutral economy justify the means of getting there when our human health is at risk? So I urge you to stand with me and my team today to uphold and propose this motion that EU climate ambitions will endanger human health. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Ciara. And so with your concluding remarks, that concludes the first in our series of debates for this season. Again, I want to thank 2 teams for taking part. As you know, the idea of this is supporting the next generation of business leaders. And if what we saw today is anything to go by, I think we can rest a bit easier that the world will be in safe hands in the future. So thank you for that. I'd like to thank our judges, Dan and Cathal, Harriet, Tim and Isla for their time and their contributions. I'd also like to thank my colleague Beth Han. I think they did an excellent job on the timekeeping. And to, of course, all of our technical team. I'm going to leave it there. We'll see you all on the 10th of March to announce the results and to invite 2 teams to the Butchers Hall in London for the 28th of March. And of course, announce best speakers and all of that. So until then, can I thank you all again and look forward to seeing you in the next chapter, as they say. Thank you very much, everybody.